it's always hard to tell the future, but my sense is that physical cash and digital fiat currency, or physical currency and digital fiat currency, will coexist for a very, very long time. And then, if it is true what we saw with, the way we go about writing and sending letters, one fine morning we woke up and realized that we may never put a stamp on an envelope again.
Or write a check, a paper check.
Or write a paper check again.
Yeah.
So it might creep up on us, but who knows? Maybe in our lifetime, maybe not.
Yeah.
Barefoot Innovation starts right now. Bitcoin began in 2009, only 8 years ago, and set forces in motion that are only starting now to show their potential power. One of them was really a byproduct, the creation of the blockchain, or distributed ledger technology, which is now on its way to just disrupting activities that reach far beyond payments, from value chains to contracts. The intentional innovation, though, was establishing a new form of currency, digital or virtual currency, that functions as an alternative payment system and operates on the internet rather than through banks and the ACH. The financial system is still in the early stage of grappling with the potential benefits and risks that arise from this mold-breaking model. I'm going to link in my show notes to my long ago blog post on it called The Benefits of Bitcoin. But my guest for today's show brings yet another angle, and a unique one, to rethinking money. He is Jonathan Dharmapalan, and he's the founder and CEO of eCurrency Mint. Jonathan spent 25 years in the telecommunications field, including becoming head of Ernst & Young's Global Telecommunications Center in 2011. And his insight at eCurrency is that the best way to capture the power of digital currency is to have governments themselves issue it. He and I met during the annual meeting of AFI, the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, in Fiji. And to record our conversation, we found a sunshiny spot right at the edge of the sea. You can hear waves gently breaking and people at adjacent tables enjoying lunch and cold beverages. And there he explained his vision for building a new system based on government-issued e-currency. He argues that this concept can capture the best of all worlds by combining the stability and confidence that comes with well-managed traditional currency with also the advantages of virtual money, such as speed, ease of use, and infinite divisibility. I love this conversation because it exemplifies how innovative thinking in finance, once it gets sort of released into the wild, can spark more and more creative thinking far beyond what the original innovators had in mind. Often it leads to solving problems we don't even realize we have, because we just assume the world is a certain way and we can't picture anything else. It reminds me of the quote attributed to Henry Ford, apparently inaccurately, that if he had asked customers what they wanted in his day, they would have said faster horses. I hope you enjoy my thought-provoking conversation with Jonathan Dharmapalan. I'm so happy today to welcome my guest, Jonathan Dharmapalan of eCurrency. Welcome.
Thanks, Joanne. Nice to be here.
So glad you can be on our show. We are at the AFI conference in Fiji, the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, and we're actually sitting on a beautiful beachside spot here, so people may be able to hear a little bit of surf and noises in the background and some birds. It's been fantastic, hasn't it, here?
It has been. It's hard to believe that we're actually working.
Yeah, I've been working, I must admit, but it's really been idyllic here. So I have been enjoying this meeting in particular because there are a lot of ideas here that are, I think they're farther advanced than some of the conversations that I hear in other forums. And yeah, I got a chance to know you and your team a little bit, and wanted to reach out and ask you to do a podcast with me. So eCurrency is a really powerful, maybe simple, but powerful concept. And I'd like to start by asking you first to talk a little bit about yourself, your own
Sure.
background, kind of the journey that brought you here, and then share what eCurrency does.
Sure. Well, I'm a technologist by training in that I studied engineering, started my career at Bell Labs, and eventually ended up in the consulting business, much like yourself.
Yeah.
Except I focused primarily on telecommunications and technology. So I've been quite fascinated with the transformative power of both telecommunications and technology, because in many ways they go hand in hand. And I'd say that what struck me almost like an epiphany was that something we had started to take very much for granted, money itself, was going through this massive transformation. It was becoming digitized. And we have seen this digitization initially in the banking world, but it was fast becoming a retail form of digital money, especially when we started seeing the proliferation of mobile money, prepaid cards, e-money, so to speak. And we were watching the reaction of regulators to this proliferation of digital money. And we asked ourselves the question, when money becomes digital, what rules are going to apply to it? And the epiphany was that the rules that should apply to money already existed. And that for all practical purposes, it was not necessary to sit down and write new rules when the old rules were perfectly applicable if only we were to consider them more carefully in the digital world. So what are the old rules? The old rules, which have pretty much been taken for granted, is that money, or currency, if you want to call it that, comes from a source, pretty much nominated by the government, that says that the central bank of a country or a republic is the sole issuer of that currency. And that once issued and in circulation, it becomes the legal tender of that country. Rules are very simple. They're essentially sort of two main points. Only the central bank issues it, and once issued, we are all obligated to use it as legal tender for the execution of any transaction within that country. So we ask ourselves the question, if that applies today to things like coins and paper money, why should it not continue to apply in a world where there was digital currency being created? And that's essentially what gave birth to eCurrency. So eCurrency it's now a company, but its purpose is to enable the central bank, or a central bank, to create in digital form what they today create in paper analog form. That is a secure instrument that emanates solely from the central bank, that the rest of the public both have the right, privilege, and obligation to use when we are in the territories that those currencies cover. So that's the essential idea of eCurrency.
And talk about the benefits that you see coming from this.
Well, the primary benefit is really the empowerment of the currency itself. There are lots of secondary and tertiary benefits, but we actually started simply by saying, if you are able to take this very simple rule that we've all been sort of gotten used to. We all know that if we are in a country where the currency is a rupee, we are obligated to use rupee as the unit of account, the medium of exchange, and frankly a store of value that'll enable any value-added transaction. So we said that the real benefit comes from the fact that we're going to take that rupee and digitize it. Why digitize it? Well, the paper rupee, or the physical form of currency, is a very powerful instrument already, because we've all accepted the rules that it abides by. We can essentially take it for granted. I can go into a store, I can buy a banana, I can give the vendor 10 rupees, and the transaction's over. There is no residual settlement, counterparty risk, back-end processing necessary, because it works. But we found that physical currency in the digital world had this big drawback, which is executing a transaction required us to be in the same place at the same time to execute a physical transaction. But given that we are all so migratory and we are trying to execute transactions over great distances, digitizing that same rupee gives the currency the power to fly. It can actually transcend space and time. So that is the sort of primary benefit. But then as you start to peel the onion, you start to realize that if this thing, rupee, can fly, and that it can preserve its characteristics in digital form, then governments are empowered to send this rupee to the very end person they intend it for, rather than having to go through multiple intermediary parties, where, of course, we have these issues of leakage and fraud and theft, etc. At the same time, the government's also able to receive the rupee in a relatively direct form from its public, whether that be for payment of utilities or payment of taxes or whatever obligations the public might have to the government. Then, of course, if you have a digital currency instrument that was actually provided to the public by the central bank, it is by definition interoperable. So it doesn't become system specific. Every system now carries the digital rupee, and all systems can speak to each other and can settle instantaneously with finality every time a digital rupee or a digital currency is exchanged. So these benefits start to compound as you start to think about it. We were just talking a little bit about productivity and where productivity comes from. Productivity comes from creating efficiency, and efficiency comes from taking friction out of a system. So by introducing something digital that behaves exactly like a physical currency instrument, you're essentially taking friction out, thereby introducing efficiency, thereby generating productivity. So these are sort of the secondary and tertiary benefits, but the idea of a digital fiat currency is no different than the ideas around a physical fiat currency.
So talk about your business plan. Where do you stand? You're signing up governments? Is that your approach?
It's a complex business plan in the sense that once we understood that this idea was going to percolate very nicely among central bankers, we had the classic challenge of how. How do you create a digital currency unit? And how do you make sure that the power and the control for issuing it is exclusively controlled by that central bank? So these quickly translated into technical and security challenges. Needless to say, a physical currency instrument is arguably the most secure piece of paper in the world. So we realized that to do this digitally, you had to essentially create the most secure digital message in the world. And it turned out that the technology to do that did not exist. So we actually had to go into basic research.
When did you found the company?
We founded the company the ideas came to me in late 2009, 2008 timeframe. then we essentially brought a group of scientists and engineers together to even imagine its possibility in around 2011. And then intense work on it started, I would say, in the latter part of 2011. And the basic components were designed, built, tested, improved, redesigned, rebuilt, retested over a period of about 5 years now. No simple task. Required a lot of patience on the part of everyone involved. We have put the technology itself through extensive testing, extensive security testing, extensive processes to make sure that it's compliant with domestic, international, global standards. And frankly, now we are helping both domestic and international bodies use the fundamental principles in this to set new standards for digital fiat currency technology. At the same time, we are in deep engagement with central banks about a path to deploying. And the paths differ from country to country depending on the appetite of the central bank. But we expect to go from testing phase to full commercial phase in more than one country this year. Those will get announced when the countries are ready to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then slowly expanding it as this thing rolls out.
Are you finding interest varying by type of country, size of country, or not necessarily?
Well, interestingly, I'll say central bankers tend to be quite consistent. Conceptually, I think we have a tremendous amount of buy-in. However, I'd say that all central banks will take very cautionary steps, and we encourage that. This is not something to be sort of blindly rushed into. But the steps that are being taken mitigate the various potential risks, but slowly starts to take advantage of some of the benefits. So an example is by extending the security capability, you have essentially created digital stored value. Digital secured stored value. Digital secured stored value now allows multiple parties to interoperate, knowing that the value they just received from somebody else did not get corrupted in the transaction, or did not get corrupted before the transaction. So this interoperability feature is very attractive, without even declaring it currency. And so both commercial banks and e-money operators are now excited about rolling this out. Needless to say, digitally secured stored value very easily translates into currency, but it only requires a central bank to declare it as such. So we see this as a 1, 2, 3 step process to the end result, which would be ideal, which is the public gets to benefit from a digital fiat currency.
What do you think is the motivation of the central banks, or the main things that are attracting them to doing it?
I think the recognition that they are the sole issuer of currency is pretty much universal. They are watching the world evolve very, very quickly around them to a digital world. In fact, even in the late 90s, central banks started asking the question, what's the role of a central bank in a digital world? And with this possibility, with this capability, those questions start to get answered pretty easily, because they go to their organic law. The organic law says we, the central bank, are the sole issuer of currency, and so in a digital world we can continue to do that. So that would be I would think, a motivating factor. Central banks also know that they play a role. Needless to say, here we are at the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. We have 60, 70 countries participating.
Yeah, I think maybe 80.
Maybe 80 countries participating. These central banks know that they play a role, whether that be in the stability of their countries, in the monetary policies of their countries, but more importantly, in enabling financial inclusion in their countries. So in as much as a digital fiat currency can extend the power of financial inclusion further and further into the consumer and the public base, central banks are interested. They're very clearly, as conservative as they might be, they're also rather forward-looking and forward-thinking. And this is a wonderful platform for them to start looking into the future, seeing what their roles evolve to.
A couple of things that come to mind as you think, you mentioned before the secondary and tertiary benefits. One is that these currencies will be divisible, so you can use them for micropayments, which can be a big benefit for financial inclusion.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes. So there is no limit to the divisibility of the currency, and there is no limit to the recombinability of the currency, as long as it doesn't violate certain boundary conditions. And a boundary condition might be that the central bank issues $1 billion in their currency, domestic currency unit. There can exist no more than $1 billion in circulation. Now, the central bank can change that boundary condition, increase it or decrease it, driven by their monetary policy decisions. But yes, this currency is infinitely divisible, recombinable, and can transact over any electronic medium. That, unfortunately, is something we can't avoid. If it is going to be an electronic currency or a digital currency, it needs an electronic or digital medium to operate on.
Yeah. And what about how it may interact with anti-money laundering efforts? Digital currency is more traceable than paper currency, I think.
So we didn't spend a lot of time thinking beyond the simple rules under which currency exists. But as this discussion has expanded, there has obviously been questions similar to what you're asking. How does what role does this play in gray money, in black money, in the gray economy, the black economy, money laundering, illegal activities, etc. Our general position is we are empowering the public and the country, or the central banks empowering the public and the country to operate in a digital fiat. The rules that need to surround that digital fiat will vary from country to country depending on what their concerns are. And one of the benefits of it being digital is that you can embed the rules in the currency itself. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's really a reg tech or a legal tech, because what you're doing is you're taking the rules and maybe even cultural practices of a country, and you're able to encapsulate in a digital set of rules.
Can you give an example?
A simple example might be that in a country it might be a requirement that a transaction over $10,000 is somehow registered with the central bank. I'll just make that up. Well, in a digital fiat currency, you could very easily embed that rule. So, if it so turns out that somebody executes or wants to execute a transaction above $10,000, there is an automatic process by which that transaction and other information around it are registered.
More removal of friction.
More removal of friction. And you can build that into the rules of the currency itself, because it's digital. Privacy concerns it is a common practice for us to think that cash-based transactions, for the most part, are private. If that's culturally a practice that a central bank wants to extend further, well, those privacy concerns can actually be built into the information contained in the currency, whereby the transactors are not known. The currency itself is identified, it has its serial number, and you know everything you need to know about it as a value, but the transactors or the parties involved are not. And we feel that it's really up to the country, the central bank, the legal system, and cultural practice to embed those rules. Some, all, none, it's really up to the deployment.
Interesting. Very interesting. And do you envision that this will function side by side with physical cash as most electronic payments do now?
Well, it's always hard to tell the future, but my sense is that physical cash and digital fiat currency, or physical currency and digital fiat currency, will coexist for a very, very long time. And then, if it is true what we saw with, the way we go about writing and sending letters, one fine morning we woke up and realized that we may never put a stamp on an envelope again.
Or write a check, a paper check.
Or write a paper check again.
Yeah.
So it might creep up on us, but who knows? Maybe in our lifetime, maybe not.
Yeah. And what about relationship to non-fiat digital currency and cryptocurrency?
That's a good question. So I would, even though we didn't start there, I would in some ways say that this is the counterbalance to non-fiat currencies, meaning that we don't necessarily have to even anticipate the need or the use of cryptocurrencies if a central bank has, or if central banks have taken it upon themselves to provide that capability in a digital legal tender or digital fiat environment. One could argue that digital currencies or cryptocurrencies are parallel currencies, and that some, maybe many, maybe even all countries may or may not tolerate them. Just like they don't tolerate a second currency operating in their environment. So we'll see. But I would say that at least the perspective we brought to this is a counterbalance to the need for cryptocurrencies that are not fiat.
And I assume all this will speed up payments, especially in countries that have slow payments.
Well, this is the secondary benefit that we didn't think about, that we started to realize. With a digital fiat that has the ability to be transacted in any denomination, bank-to-bank transactions get expedited. So if banks are holding a digital fiat currency, they can instantaneously settle between banks without actually having to go through the clearing processes that they go through.
Yeah.
So these benefits have become apparent to commercial banks, and so their interest in talking about this has also gone up. It's going to evolve. It's going to play itself out, and
It's interesting to listen to you talk about it as you've got an idea, and then it's raising more and more interesting issues. Talk about your business model for eCurrency.
Well, our business model is we are a technology provider and a service and support provider. We very firmly believe that the issuance and the authority over all technological components of this has to rest with the issuer. And if that issuer is a central bank, the central bank has 100% control over all of this. However, since it is a technology. It needs maintenance, it needs upgrades, it needs evolution, it needs expanded capabilities, and we will play a role in providing some of those going forward. So it's not much different than a highly evolved technology product and service model on our part.
And where's the company based?
The company is headquartered out of Ireland. We do much of our R&D in Ireland and California, and then we have representation in the countries where we are active.
And what haven't we talked about that we should?
What haven't we talked about? Well, there is a tendency for all of us to think that the next sort of invention like this is going to solve every imaginable problem. I'm very, very cautious not to rush to that conclusion. I am aware that there are some primary issues that can be very quickly addressed with this, and then it's going to take careful thought about how this gets applied, to sort of get the benefit of the secondary and tertiary benefits we talked about. I think the forums like AFI sort of connect this digitization to other broader issues, conversations around shadow banking, the benefits of shadow banking, the risks of shadow banking. Does this have a role in that? I don't know, but it's very interesting for us to start thinking about that. We've talked about large populations today that are highly migratory. All of us are migratory workers, believe it or not. And it's as wide as the migratory work that we do, all the way down to people who unfortunately are refugees or are marginalized without the stability of a home or a country. I'm quite certain there are applications that we will imagine and make happen over time. So, these are still developing conversations, and again, thinking through this is going to be a very interesting process. And I'm overwhelmed by the fact that we could be having these conversations.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I saw you make a presentation. We both spoke to the same group a few days ago, and I was really intrigued with it. And then as I've gone through the meetings and actually heard more people talking about it also, and had a little more chance to talk with you and your team, it's really, really interesting. One more question. Other than the central banks themselves, do you perceive regulatory hurdles? Are there key regulatory issues that are going to need to be thought through beyond the ones that we've already touched on?
Maybe regulatory, but more, general and broad acceptance is probably a better way to think about it. So I imagine that both finance ministries and monetary policy and governments have to be involved in this discussion. I don't view that necessarily as regulatory, but rather bringing value to the conversation. And I do think that at an international level, we do need to have some conversations about the standard setting and how we help make this a standard that then others can build on. Innovation can happen on a simple set of rules and standards. And we haven't talked about cross-border yet. We have only focused on in-country digitization, one thing at a time. I think at some point we should address the cross-border issue as well.
Absolutely. Well, Jonathan Dharmapalan, thank you so much for being my guest today. Tell us where people can get information about eCurrency.
It's very easy. We have a easily accessible website, It's eCurrency.net. Feel free to go to it. And beyond that, if you send an email to info@eCurrency.net, we'll be happy to make sure you have the information you need.
Great. And we will put additional information in our show notes at jsbarefoot.com. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Joanne. It was nice talking with you.
I hope you found my conversation with Jonathan Dharmapalan as fascinating as I did. Come to the show notes for much more information about him and eCurrency. Meanwhile, I am very happy to share the fact that I recently became the board chair at CFSI, the Center for Financial Services Innovation, which we find ourselves often referencing on this show. If you haven't signed up yet to come to our Emerge conference in June, please be sure to do that. And also come that same week to the ABA's Regulatory Compliance Conference, or RCC. This is the ABA's huge compliance conference, and they're innovating in their format this year, including by having me record some very special podcasts straight from the conference floor. I'm also going to be holding a fireside chat there on the main stage with Jean Ludwig of Promontory and Alistair Rennie of IBM Watson. As you probably know, Watson now owns Promontory, and they are working on innovating in RegTech. And we're going to talk about how RegTech will change banking and compliance. Also, it's not too early to put Money 2020 on your agenda for October for the U.S. version in Las Vegas. I'm going to MC the compliance regulatory track there, and they already have fabulous speakers lined up. Remember, meanwhile, to review Barefoot Innovation on iTunes, and please sign up to get emails on new podcasts and on my newsletter and blog posts by coming to jsbarefoot.com. Also, go to jsbarefoot.com to send in your buck a show so that we can keep Barefoot Innovation going. And please also join my Facebook fan page and follow me on Twitter @JoanneBarefoot. And I will see you soon.